There's sort of a standard narrative that's attached to the end of the British Empire, and you probably know how it goes. At the start of the First World War, the Empire is at the apogee of its power and prestige, not to mention its length and girth. A quarter of the world map is colored pink. The sun never sets on His Majesty's empire, but then the war happens and so much blood and treasure gets dumped into that the ability of the British to effectively administer their far-flung worldwide network of colonial possessions is significantly degraded, and bits of the empire start falling away. Between the wars, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa all gain their national sovereignty, more or less, and it starts looking like a foregone conclusion that India is going to be out the door sooner than later. Then the Second War happens, and in order to win the thing, Britain has to sell off all of Grandma's jewelry and the furniture, and its status as a great power well and truly comes to an end. But after this point, most people tend to think that aside from all the death and carnage and bloodshed and famine and mass forced migration that was associated with Mountbatten's botched exit from India and the attendant creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh, that the rest of the final dissolution of the British Empire was just a slow and gradual process of standing up new governments in the remaining countries and then closing up shop and heading on back home. But the final dissolution, when it came, was actually a sudden and fairly traumatic thing, and which had a singular cause, namely the Suez Crisis of 1956, wherein Colonel Nasser seized and nationalized the canal and threw out the British and the French, and if you're a fan of The Crown, you know the story already, more or less. Then the British and the French conspired with the Israelis to cook up a false flag operation so they'd have political cover to go in and bomb the living shit out of Cairo. Anthony Eden, the prime minister, such as he was not only the one who conceived and planned and utterly botched this thing, but he did it without consulting the Americans first. And President Dwight Eisenhower was fucking pissed. And he said so, in public, loudly, lots of times. It was such a stinging rebuke, in fact, that it pretty much wrecked any national prestige that Britain still had remaining at this stage, and whatever credibility and moral authority they still had as a colonial administrator, in the places where they still were that, it was pretty much gone overnight. And so, in British West Africa, as it was then, things very quickly went from, sure, let's have a soft, open-ended timetable and we'll stand up the new government when it's good and ready to be stood up, to, okay, you guys are evicted, you got 60 days to get the fuck out, you're not getting your goddamn security deposit back either, you dicks. So the rest of 1956 and all of 1957 wound up being a real dog shit sandwich for the British people, all things considered. So you might not expect that a mere 7 years later in 1964 they would be all that eager to go to their local cinemas and watch a movie about it. But they were, and they did. And that's the film we're talking about tonight. Guns at Batasi, starring Dickie Attenborough and Jack Hawkins, directed by John Gillerman, also featuring the screen debut of an impossibly young-looking Mia Farrow. It's a picture that was never released in the United States, as nearly all British films weren't in 1964. And when I woke up on Saturday morning last, I had never heard of it before, and I don't know how it works that these cool old movies pop up in my YouTube recommendations all the time now. But it's currently my favorite thing about YouTube, that's for damn sure. It's really been an invaluable resource since I swore off new movies at the beginning of this year and started endeavoring to make the transition from movie fan to film buff. So it's first thing Saturday morning, and my habit is to watch a movie that I've been meaning to watch attentively. It's my most attentive movie watch of the week, first thing Saturday morning. And on this day, up pops this picture from 1964 with Dickie Attenborough and Jack Hawkins, and just, you had me at hello! You bet your ass I'll watch it if those two dudes are in it. Don't even care what it's about, but the guy whose channel it was posted on didn't have the title of the movie right, and the version he uploaded was this horrible, terrible, god-awful colorized version, so I search YouTube, but I don't have the title right. So I get no results when I try to find the proper black and white version, so I decide, shit, I guess I just have to get over the colorization thing. God, it was somewhere between really bad early color television and watching an old 3D movie without the glasses on, but even still, oh my God, did I love the picture. At the end of the second act, I'm thinking, if they stick the landing on this thing, I might be willing to call this one of the best films I've ever seen. But they didn't stick the landing. More on that later. But there's one scene in this picture. It's a 7-minute scene that runs from the 53-minute mark to the 1-hour mark, right smack dab in the middle of the movie. That is as good as filmmaking gets. It's the perfect confluence of a compelling story, a strong script, two brilliant actors who are fully invested in their characters and believe in the material. And the speech Dickie Attenborough gives at the end of this thing, the first time I saw it, I wished I could go up and whisper in his ear like little Trudy Foster to Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was the best acting I've ever seen in my whole life. Jim Eagle's going to hit the music. Then we're all going to watch that scene together. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the color's in black and white and the sound's in mono, and we bloody well like it that way, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And let's just quickly set the scene before we watch this. It's 1957. We are in an unnamed African country that is obviously based upon Kenya. The word has just gone out that the British are going to be bugging out within a matter of days, and local operational authority is being passed from the British Army to the new army of the new government. But then, almost immediately, a coup d'etat ensues. The new government is seen as having no legitimacy since it was installed by the former colonial occupier, so the officers the British just handed off to, they are duly overthrown by their subordinates and hauled off to the capital to be tried for treason. Dickie Attenborough is playing Regimental Sergeant Major Lauderdale. Errol John is playing Lieutenant Boniface, who is the leader of the mutineers. And everything else you need to know about the story and the characters and their motivations is contained within the dialogue. Imagine that. Let's watch.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Now, sir. Sergeant Major, I've come to inform you that I've taken over command of the battalion from Captain Abram. You'll therefore regard me as your commanding officer.
I've only got one CO, sir. That's Colonel Deal. As far as I'm concerned, Captain Abraham is in temporary command of the battalion.
As far as I'm concerned, Captain Abram is a traitor. And anyway, he's dead.
I'll believe that when I see it in casualty return. In the meantime, sir, will you please remove your headdress while in the sergeant's mess and request your escort to do the same?
Leave them on. Sergeant Major, I'm not interested in points of etiquette at the moment.
Mr. Boniface! I've been a member of this mess for 23 years, sir. In all that time, I've never seen anybody, man, woman, or child, sergeant, warrant officer, field marshal, or prime minister, walk into this mess with his hat upon his head. I do not see you now, sir.
All right. If it worries you.
No, sir. Can I be of service?
I wish you to understand, Sergeant Major, that I will give you protection if you cooperate with me. Your future in my country is very limited, you must appreciate.
Limited, did you say, sir? That's a very elastic word.
No doubt you'll be sent back to your own country in due course. At this very moment, the new president is considering the matter.
And where do you come in, Mr. Boniface? You, as a loyal officer, sir, where do you come in?
Loyal to whom? To the corrupt lackeys your government left to lead us when they granted us our so-called independence. So you consider that soldiers should not be revolutionaries. Your Cromwell was a soldier, wasn't he? Did he not grab Ireland, Sergeant Major?
Well, you know, sir, it was only for their own good. The Micks have always been obstinate, sir, very obstinate. As for myself, I'm a soldier. I don't understand politics.
Well, I do understand them, Sergeant Major. And for my political education, I'm obliged to one of your compatriots, Miss Barker-Wise. However, I did not come here to discuss politics. I've come to tell you all that you must remain here until I receive further instructions from the new government. My men will surround the mess and they will shoot anyone who tries to leave. In the meantime, I am taking possession of the camp in the name of the new republic. Sergeant Major, you will deliver to me all your arms and ammunition, and I will be responsible for your safety. Is that understood? Also, I shall withdraw your servants who will be required to carry arms. Corporal Abel, Private Daniel. You will collect all the mess silver and your kit and report to me in the orderly room. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Now, Sergeant Major, if you leave all your weapons on the veranda, I will send a squad of men to collect them. I will inform you of any later developments.
Just one moment, sir. If you please.
Well?
Now you listen to me, Mr. Boniface. I'm a professional soldier, born across the road from Wellington Barracks. I enlisted when I was 17. By the time I was 24, I was a sergeant serving on the northwest frontier of India. Sometimes, Mr. Boniface, I'd lay awake in my tent with a hurricane lamp. Sometimes in the middle of a blizzard, reading about the exploits of other British soldiers. Sometimes I'd be lying there in my freezing cold tent, actually sweating. Beads of sweat pouring down my face from a battle 200 years old. And later on, I had a little active service of my own to take notice of. Now, what I'm coming to, sir, is this. All this experience of warfare, imaginary and otherwise, gives me a certain amount of experience to face this little misunderstanding with a certain amount of sang-froid. It's a fly in the wall, sir, a fight with a feather. Silly!
No, I refuse to...
As far as the weapons are concerned, I was ordered by my CO to keep them to swap flies with. And until I get further instructions from the same source, I intend to hang on to them.
Now, look here, Sergeant.
Will you please listen to me? You seem to have gained control of this battalion by an act of mutiny. Very well. You're entitled to the mess servants because they're your countrymen, not mine. You're entitled to the mess property because it stands on your soil. But if you think for one moment that I'm going to hand over the lives of these people to the custody of a half-cooked, jumped-up, sad little blackboard warrior like yourself, you're very much mistaken. Do I make myself clear?
Absolutely clear, Sergeant Major.
I always knew that one would turn out to be a savvy boy.
Now, you've often heard me give actors a hard time when I think they deserve it. When they say stupid shit, when they act entitled and oppressed, and especially when they act like anybody cares what they think about politics. What you have never heard me say is that acting isn't a hard job, or that when it's done well, it can't rise to the level of a high art. Because in point of fact, it is, and it can. And Dickie Attenborough just painted a masterpiece in that scene. You want to know how to be a great actor? There it is. Here endeth the lesson. It's a weird thing, though. Also, it's not so weird, though, maybe when you think about it. Because when you know what made the man tick. Because he could have been a great big Hollywood star if he would have wanted to. The Great Escape was the first Hollywood blockbuster that he starred in, and everybody loved him in it because of course they did. And he could have up and moved to L.A. and been a huge superstar in American cinema. But what does he do next? He goes back home and makes this picture about the final depressing collapse of the British Empire. It's really only for a few years in the mid-'60s where he becomes widely known as an actor in this country. The Great Escape in '63, then he does The Sand Pebbles, again with Steve McQueen in '65, then he does Dr. Dolittle, and then he's mostly absent from American screens all the way up until he shows up in Jurassic Park in 1993. That picture comes out when I'm 19, I think, and Dickie Attenborough meant nothing to me. I had heard the name before, but I didn't recognize his face or remember him from anything I had seen. He was just old British actor guy. It was much the same deal as the year before with Richard Harris in Unforgiven. Didn't recognize him from anything. He's just old British actor guy. Today I can watch that picture and say, cool, it's Richard Harris. Only took me 30 years to get with the program. But with Attenborough, here in America, I think he was much better known as a director than an actor. What did he win? Like 67 Oscars for Gandhi in 1982 and A Bridge Too Far, obviously, one of the very best war pictures ever made. But here again, you have Attenborough doing his best work, whether in front of the camera or behind it, when dealing with the retelling of events that didn't turn out all that well for his own country. And I think now, having seen a fairly significant chunk of his career output, I have a much more detailed understanding of why this guy was held in such very high esteem and why his death, almost 10 years ago now, caused such an incredible outpouring of public grief. If you set aside members of the royal family, I don't think it's overstating things to say Dickie Attenborough might have been the most widely beloved Briton since Churchill. He probably occupied a cultural station and still does and will continue to do that's not unlike the one that John Wayne occupies here in our country. Everybody knew John Wayne was a conservative, but he never talked bad about anybody just for being a liberal, and he was never aggressively partisan. Conversely, Attenborough was a labor man, decidedly left of center in his orientation, but conservatives liked him anyway because they felt he had done right by his portrayals of people in the British Armed Forces. In his acting roles and in his directorial projects. John Wayne earned much of his enduring public affection the same way, by portraying members of the military in such a way that real war veterans felt they had been done justice. There are some who say he was just overcompensating to assuage his feelings of guilt over being, allegedly, a draft dodger. And to them I would say this. Does it matter? Spoiler alert, no, it does not. If you do a praiseworthy thing that people genuinely appreciate, I don't give two squirts of piss what your motivations were. Call me a dangerous radical, I guess, if you have to. But with Attenborough, you can see that whole equation contained within that 7-minute scene that we just watched. I don't think an actor could be that invested in a character and a performance without the actor himself genuinely being a true British patriot. And bear in mind what the character, Sergeant Major Lauderdale, told us about himself right there. He said, I have been on this station for 23 years. And the story is set in 1957, which means his country was at war for 6 years, and he had to sit the whole thing out in a sleepy colonial garrison in East Africa. Hey, Sergeant Major, where did you serve in the war? Oh, I was in Kenya, trimming my handlebar mustache. You can see in Attenborough's performance all the humiliation and self-loathing that this man feels for being a professional soldier who's never been anywhere near a battle. And the way they develop the character in the first act, they want the viewer to see this guy as a ridiculous martinet NCO who spends his days screaming at people for their deficient saluting technique and making sure the Queen's portrait is hanging just so, because he's got nothing better to do. And he's just marking time until his meaningless, undistinguished career comes to an end. And he expresses all of that in his exchange with Lieutenant Boniface. He concedes to him, sure, I've had a pretty ridiculous career so far, but the fondest dream I have is that before it's over, I might have one chance to do battle for Queen and country. And if you want to be the man who affords me that opportunity, then, sir, it will not go unobliged. And that's the great thing that happens, right, when the first act ends and the second act begins. Nothing about the character's actions or comportment really changes, but the moment we're thrust into an emergency situation, he is the man who knows exactly what everybody should be doing. He is the man providing the leadership and the reserves of moral courage that his men need him to provide. And as much as I don't normally do the whole spoiler alert thing, I'm reticent to say what happens in the third act, just in case anybody wishes to watch the picture on its own terms without finding out what happens, which obviously I would encourage them to do. I will only repeat what I said before. If they had stuck the landing with this thing, I would be willing to say this is an all-time great picture, but I don't think they stuck the landing. Before we go, welcome to you new subscribers. Thanks for making Hunter Biden's Cocaine Blues such a runaway hit of the summer. The host sure does appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed for watching. I will see you the next time I see you in whatever form that happens to be in. Do feel free to vote in the comments about whether the next song parody should be Into the Great Wide Open by Tom Petty, because I've got some pretty interesting lyrical ideas for that one. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn!